Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really diving into a truly gripping story, drawing from Betty Mahmoody's intense personal account in Not Without My Daughter. You brought this one to the table, and it's powerful. We're going to unpack the big cultural and political themes woven into her experience. Think of this as a sort of audio essay exploring her journey.
Exactly. And this deep dive is centered squarely on Betty Mahmoody's book, Not Without My Daughter. It's nonfiction, came out in 1987, and it really opened a very personal window onto a specific time and, frankly, a collision of cultures.
Right.
So our mission really is to try and understand the complexities she was navigating, the forces at play in Iran during that period. And through her writing, we also get a real sense of Betty herself, her resilience, her viewpoint as the author telling this story.
Okay, so let's set the scene. We're talking mid-1980s. Betty, she's American, travels to Iran. She's with her husband, Moody, who's Iranian-American, and their little daughter, Mahtab. Now, on paper, it's supposed to be a 2-week trip, a vacation, visit his family. But as Betty herself writes, she had this deep, nagging fear right from the start that Moody actually planned to keep them there for good.
That fear is palpable, isn't it? It just hangs over everything from the beginning.
It really does. And that apprehension kind of shapes her initial observations, sets the stage for everything that unfolds.
Absolutely. And as we get into her account, Betty emerges as this central figure. Resilient, yes, but also incredibly observant, even while navigating this increasingly dangerous situation. Not Without My Daughter details her growing worry, her eventual really desperate fight.
Yeah.
And as the author, she's giving us this firsthand view of the cultural and political landscape, but it's filtered naturally through her own experiences, her fears, and this fierce, fierce need to protect her daughter.
Okay, let's unpack that. Starting with those first moments, arriving in Iran. The flight itself, she describes feeling this heightened anxiety. There's the general hostility towards Americans. The Iran-Iraq war is going on. It seems like that sense of unease hit her immediately. What do you think fueled that?
Well, I think it's crucial to start there. Imagine the sensory input she describes. The huge, overwhelming crowds at Tehran airport, probably a massive contrast to what she was used to back in the States.
Sure.
Then there's the passport issue. It seems small, maybe, but being told they all had to use one single Iranian passport. For her, that could easily feel like their American identity was being, sort of erased right there in that moment.
Yeah, losing control already.
Exactly. These initial things likely just fed into the fear she already had.
And it didn't stop at the airport, did it? That ritual with the sheep slaughter when they arrive at Moody's family home, Baba Haji and Bozorg's place.
Oh, yeah.
The expectation for her and little Mahtab to step over the fresh blood. I mean, that's a really powerful and probably deeply unsettling introduction to a different set of customs.
Absolutely. For someone completely unfamiliar, the visceral nature of it, the blood itself, it could easily feel, barbaric maybe. Definitely unsettling. It's an immediate, stark signal.
Yeah.
You're in a world with very different traditions now.
And it highlights those different expectations of respect, maybe.
Could be. It certainly draws a line between her world and this one.
Going back a step, that passport thing you mentioned, insisting on the single Iranian passport, it really does underscore a different view of nationality, of identity itself.
Precisely. It's like in that official context, their individual Americanness gets folded into this collective Iranian identity, at least on paper. And that likely just added to Betty's feeling of unease, of losing her footing.
Then there were the everyday things, big differences in food and hygiene that she details, the food being incredibly greasy, right? Because oiliness meant wealth.
Yeah, quite the contrast to typical American dietary ideas at the time.
And her descriptions of Bozorg's kitchen, the built-up grace, the questionable sanitation, it really paints a picture of, a very different standard, a different reality.
And the cheese, don't forget the smell of that cheese left out.
Oh, right. How could I forget the cheese? But these details, even the small ones, they give such insight into the cultural divide, don't they?
They really do, because things like food, how you keep your kitchen, these are deeply ingrained cultural norms. So these constant little differences would be reminders that she's operating under a completely different system of rules, different priorities. The greasy food means wealth idea, for example, points to totally different economic backgrounds and social values.
And this is all happening, we need to remember, in post-revolutionary Tehran. Her descriptions of the city itself, the refugees pouring in, the generally grim atmosphere she depicts, the chaotic traffic.
Yeah, the driving sounds terrifying.
Right. Even the open sewage gutters, the sort of haphazard construction everywhere, it paints this picture of a city under enormous strain, enormous change. How do you think that environment itself affected her fear?
Well, imagine landing in a place that already feels like it's fraying at the edges. The visible signs of war, the refugee situation, infrastructure may be breaking down.
Mm.
It creates this baseline of instability, of unpredictability.
Mm.
So for someone already feeling vulnerable, stepping into a new culture, these external signs of stress would almost certainly magnify her sense of danger, made it harder to find any sense of, comfort or normalcy.
Okay, this is where, for me, it gets really fascinating, the dynamic with Moody, his character. She paints him as, yes, a loving father, but also someone capable of real callousness.
Yeah, it's complex.
That mix she mentions, brilliance and confusion, it feels key, like he's caught somehow between his Iranian roots and the life he built in the West. What stands out about him early on?
It's that duality, isn't it?
Yeah.
You see the affection, especially for Mahtab, but then almost immediately you see him insisting Betty conform to Iranian customs, dismissing her worries. His enthusiasm for the Islamic Revolution, which, aimed to create this theocracy based on Islamic law,
Right.
that had real appeal for many Iranians who felt left behind by the Shah's regime. But his enthusiasm clashes so dramatically with Betty's growing fear. It shows this deep tie to his Iranian identity, an identity that seems to get much stronger once he's back on home soil.
And as the 2 weeks stretch on, his temper gets worse, right? His behavior seems more irrational, according to her account. It's almost like the longer he's there, the more he either reverts to or maybe embraces a part of himself that wasn't as visible in America.
It's certainly possible the environment played a role. I mean, the revolutionary atmosphere, the strong emphasis on traditional Islamic values, maybe it emboldened him, made him feel justified in asserting a more patriarchal role within the family, perhaps in ways that didn't fit their American life.
And the Iran-Iraq war is just constantly there in the background. The air raid sirens, the actual bombings she describes. These aren't abstract news reports for Betty. It's daily life. That must have just shredded her nerves.
Oh, absolutely. Living with that constant threat day in, day out,
Yeah.
it creates this pervasive anxiety, erodes any feeling of safety. And then the government propaganda she mentions, denying casualties, that just adds another layer of distrust, of uncertainty, makes it impossible to know how bad things really are.
And the religious fundamentalism is so present. The respect people show figures like Aga Marashi, even if Betty found him unpleasant. The strict social rules, enforced sometimes by teenagers, the pastor, the Revolutionary Guards, that incident near the volleyball court, or getting reprimanded for her socks, showing constant reminders of how restricted life was, especially for women.
Yeah, those encounters with the pastor really showed the day-to-day reality. Their job was literally to enforce the new regime's codes down to clothes, behavior, everything. It created this atmosphere of, being watched constantly, limited freedom of expression.
Even visiting the Shah's old palace, which sounds like it was ransacked, becomes this sort of propaganda tour.
Right, the guide focusing only on the Shah's alleged decadence, ignoring the poverty around it.
It's such a clear attempt to rewrite the narrative, justify the revolution. What does that tell us about the political climate?
It's a classic tactic in times of massive political change, isn't it? You demonize the old regime, highlight its flaws, real or imagined, to make the new one look necessary, look legitimate. It's about controlling the story, controlling memory.
So with all this swirling around her, we see Betty start to resist, trying desperately to get help. Her first attempts just to call her family back home hit roadblocks. Shows how isolated she was, what kept her going.
I think fundamentally comes down to Mahtab, her daughter. Amidst all this cultural confusion and political danger, Betty's laser focus is on Mahtab's safety, Mahtab's future. Her own observations of how women were treated, the lack of freedom she perceived, that fuels her determination to get them out, even when Moody's relatives try to convince her things aren't so bad.
That moment she describes when it truly hits her that she's essentially a prisoner, that must have been just terrifying. A turning point.
Absolutely. From then on, her whole mindset shifts, doesn't it? It's all about finding an escape route.
How does that change how she acts, how she interacts with people?
Well, her interactions become much more strategic, I think, more guarded. She starts watching everything, everyone, looking for any small opening, any person who might, just might, be willing to help. Her communication gets more careful, coded even. She has to take these calculated risks, always knowing that if Moody found out, the consequences would be severe.
And we see these attempts Trying to contact the Swiss embassy, which was representing U.S. interests then, hugely risky.
Incredibly risky.
Then reaching out to individual Iranians who seemed sympathetic or had outside connections, people like Zia, Hamid, Miss Alavi, Rashid, Amal later on. What does their willingness to help tell us about Iranian society itself?
It's so important. It shows that despite the dominant fundamentalist government, Iranian society wasn't just one single thing. There were people with different values, people willing to put themselves in danger to help a stranger. Those acts of, well, bravery and simple kindness, they show that humanity, that dissent, can exist even under oppressive regimes.
But the fear of Moody finding out hangs over everything. Every phone call attempt, every quiet conversation, it could all blow up. How did she manage that pressure, keep plotting?
Again, I think it has to be that fierce maternal drive. Protecting Mahtab gave her this incredible courage, this resilience. She also seems remarkably resourceful, able to sort of compartmentalize the fear enough to focus on the next practical step towards escape.
Let's talk about the family and community aspect, too. Iranian culture, as depicted, has these really strong family ties. And Moody definitely uses those to his advantage, doesn't he?
Or absolutely. Those deep loyalties and obligations, initially, they work to isolate Betty further. Moody uses them to pressure her, to control her. But the family isn't uniform either. You see different attitudes. Some relatives are hostile, like Ahmed Bozorg seems to be. Others show occasional kindness, like Majid or Khanum Shaheen, even if it's limited. It shows there wasn't total agreement with Moody, or with the harshest views.
Okay, the escape itself, obviously huge. Triggered by that awful news about her father dying back home and then Moody's ultimatum, Mahtab stays in Iran. That feels like the absolute final straw.
It is, isn't it? It's the ultimate threat, losing her daughter forever. Up till then, maybe, just maybe, there was some tiny hope of working things out going back. But Moody's demand just smashes that. It forces her hand. It's the catalyst for taking that incredibly dangerous leap into the unknown with the escape plan.
And Amal becomes absolutely critical in actually making that happen.
Yes, the network of people willing to help, culminating in Amal orchestrating the actual journey.
And the journey. Wow. Through the mountains into Turkey with smugglers, the constant fear, the secrecy. It sounded like a thriller novel, but it was real life.
The physical hardship alone, let alone the psychological stress, it just highlights her incredible strength, her determination. Facing the dangers of the terrain, trusting smugglers, hiding, fearing discovery at any moment, it shows the unbelievable lengths she'd go to for Mahtab.
And finally getting into Turkey, there must have been this huge wave of relief. But it wasn't instantly over, was it? There were still obstacles.
No, crossing the border was huge, but it wasn't magic. They were still in a foreign country, dependent on others, needing to navigate bureaucracy to contact the U.S. Embassy, arrange travel. The ordeal wasn't quite finished. And the trauma, of course, would linger.
So if we pull it all together, the absolute core of this story is, it's a mother's fierce, unwavering determination to save her child, set against this incredibly turbulent backdrop of cultural collision, political revolution.
Yeah.
The book itself reads almost like an audio essay from Betty, reflecting on it all.
And the personal cost is clear. The psychological impact on both Betty and Mahtab, the captivity, the fear, the escape trauma, those things leave deep marks, shape their lives forever after.
But beyond their personal story, it has these wider implications, doesn't it? It gives us this incredibly intimate look inside post-revolutionary Iran, shows the complexities people face when caught between such different cultures, different political realities.
It really does. It highlights that human dimension within huge historical events.
Betty's story throws up these big questions, too, about identity, family, freedom, what you'd risk for the people you love. It's a powerful reminder, I think, of how global politics slam right into individual lives. It gives a human face to that whole complex period.
Absolutely. It really drives home how these massive political shifts aren't abstract. They have profound, often devastating impacts on ordinary people, on families.
Her story really stands out as a testament to, well, the strength of the human spirit, maybe, facing down just incredible adversity.
Definitely. And a valuable, if difficult, personal lens onto a complex moment in history.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Betty Mahmoody's experience, maybe think about that power of a mother's love, that human resilience against what seemed like impossible odds. What parts of this really intense personal story stayed with you the most? And maybe what other questions does it spark about understanding different cultures, about personal freedom when politics get extreme, and about how individual lives get caught in the crosscurrents?